Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to share our work with you. My name is Bing Yuan from Huazhong University of Science and Technology. Today, together with Yan Jia, who is from Nankai University, we will present our work in the IoT security, in which we found attackers can leverage the security vulnerabilities in the cross-cloud IoT access control to unlock the victim's smart door. This presentation is based on our academic paper published at Usenix Security 2020. So in the past few years, smart home is emerging. So there are a lot of smart home vendors. First, there is the smart home device vendors that manufacture the IoT devices such as Mi Home, Tuya, Leafix, August, and Philips. Also, there is the smart home cloud service providers such vendors, including the Google Home, Amazon Alexa, IFTTT, smart themes. Also note that there is not necessarily a very strict line between these two types of vendors. Because some of them, such as Tuya, both manufactures devices and also provides cloud services. Both of these two kinds of vendors would usually use IoT cloud to manage their devices. Typically, the IoT cloud would connect the users and the devices, thus to inform the users the status changes of the devices and to forward the command from the users to the IoT devices. Also, the IoT clouds would usually interact with the external services, such as third-party cloud. And such interactions between the IoT clouds and the third-party clouds is it is the way that the IoT clouds to provide some advanced functionalities. For example, there is the cross-vendor, cross-cloud device control. That is, a user can use a single IoT cloud to control devices from different vendors. For example, a Google Home user can use Google Home and Google Home alone to control the Tuya plug, the Leafix bulb, and the August lock. And also, there is the sharing of device access. This functionality is actually supported widely by the IoT vendors such as smart themes, Mi Home, Apple HomeKit. And the real-world use case for this, one of the real-world use cases for the sharing of device access could be an Airbnb host to share the access to her log to an Airbnb guest during the guest's stay, and then revokes such access when the guest left. And at last, there is the device control automation, and this functionality is usually supported by the trigger action IoT platforms such as IFTTT and smart themes. Basically, the user can set automation rule, which is the IFTTT applets or a smart themes in the smart themes, a smart app in the smart themes. And an example of such rule could be to turn on the front porch light if the doorbell detects the new motions. Behind such functionalities is the device access delegation mechanisms. That is, in this supporting these functionalities, it's actually the access to the device is delegated from one party to another. Note that throughout our this talk, we call the the party that delegates access right to others, the delegator, and the recipient of the access right, the delegatee. For example, when the Airbnb host delegates the access to her smart lock to Airbnb guest, we call the host the delegator and the Airbnb guest the delegatee. And when Google Home receives the access right to the Leafix Bob, we call the Leafix Cloud the delegator and Google Home the delegatee. And there are two most common delegation mechanisms. First is the customized OAuth protocol. For example, Google Home provides the actions on Google, which is actually a customized OAuth protocol. That is, Google Home also asks for additional information from its delegator cloud during the OAuth process. For example, Google Home requires SmartThings to send the device ID of the SmartThings devices during such a delegation. And the second is the homegrown authorization. For example, the IFTTT cloud would issue trigger URL and send this URL to the SmartThings cloud. Then the SmartThings cloud can send HTTP request to this URL to trigger the actions in the IFTTT cloud. That is to control the devices behind the IFTTT cloud. And with so many parties and so many different delegation operations, there could form a very convoluted delegation chain. For example, a device would usually first be registered with or bound with the device vendor cloud. That is, the device access right is delegated from the device to the device vendor cloud. Then the vendor cloud could further delegate the access right to third parties, which are the third-party IoT clouds or other users. Further, the third-party delegatee IoT clouds and the users could further delegate the access right to others. So with this process goes on and on, the delegation chain can be very convoluted. However, despite the common and convoluted IoT delegation, the research and understanding on the security of the cross-cloud IoT delegation is far from enough. We believe the risks in the cross-cloud IoT delegation lies between the arise because of there is a gap between the theoretical models and the real-world IoT cloud systems. That is, the theoretical models analysis before all assume that all the parties run the same delegation protocol and interact through the unified interfaces, where delegation in today's real-world IoT clouds, they usually would use individual and heterogeneous delegation protocols, and the IoT clouds may be incompatible with each other. And also, the delegation chain has not been properly verified. So to investigate such security risks, we define the threat model as follows. First, we assume the delegatee user can be malicious, while the administrator, the cloud, and the devices are benign. And we assume the goal of adversary is to get unauthorized access to IoT devices. At last, we suppose the adversary would make full use of his power to acquire useful information, such as making API calls, extracting information from the system log, or to capturing and analyzing the network traffic generated by his mobile app. So considering the real-world IoT delegation scenarios and the threat model, we summarized two basic security requirements for the IoT delegation. First, in today's IoT clouds, a party on a delegation chain could get involved in another party's management of a device. Therefore, one party's policy could bring in a bring in a risk that would put another party's security in jeopardy. So ideally, delegation policies across all actors on a chain should be consistent with each party's individual security policies, thus to ensure that they will not be exposed to new threats during the whole process. Second, on a delegation chain, access right to IoT cloud, the access right to an IoT device could be distributed among multiple parties. Therefore, enforcement of a delegation policy should be comprehensive to block all the avenues of unauthorized access. And also important is the transitivity in the delegation control. That is, once upstream actor enforces a policy, all the downstream parties should follow suit. For example, in the delegation chain from A to B to C to D, if A enforces a policy that A revokes the access right to B, then ideally not only B but also C and D, they should all lose access right to A. However, we found that such requirements are often violated by today's real-world IoT clouds. For example, let's consider the following scenario where the two-year plug owner first binds the plug with his two-year account, and then the owner shares the access to the plug to a new user, such as an Airbnb guest. Then the guest could delegate the access right to the plug to the guest's Google Home account, and during which the two-year cloud would issue an auth token and send the token to the Google Home. And then the device owner revokes the guest's access right. At this point, the guest would lose the access right in the two-year system. However, we found that the guest's Google Home account can still access and control the two-year plug. This is because the Google Home Cloud still holds valid auth token. This clearly violates the transitivity in the delegation control. And leveraging this vulnerability for attack is really rather simple. The attack just needs to create a Google Home account and delegate the access right to his Google Home account during his stay at the host's house. And just by doing that, the attacker can turn his temporary access to the plug into a permanent access right, and he can do that without being notified by the plug owner. So now let's take a closer look at the two-year case. We can see a few things. First of all, there are multiple delegation operations supported in this IoT city. There is bind, there is share, and there is OAuth. The second thing is that there is always a data flow along with the delegation operations. For example, when along with the OAuth operation, there is a data flow from two-year cloud to the Google Home, which is the sending of the OAuth token. Also, at last, we notice that the access to a device is usually of multiple steps. For example, Google Home would access the two-year plug through the two-year cloud. And interestingly, we found the same patterns in the in other IoT settings. For example, in the scenario where the Leafix cloud interact with the Smart Themes cloud, and also in the use case where the Philips Hue cloud interacts with users and third-party clouds. So with the common delegation pattern identified in the different IoT settings, we start to think, is it possible, or how can we to discover vulnerabilities in the IoT delegation in a more automatic way? So we came up with the formal verification method, and we have developed a tool for this. First, let's look at the formal verification part. To use the formal verification method, we first need to define the security property, which is that the unauthorized delegatee user should not have a path to the IoT to the IoT devices which he is not entitled to access. And then we modeled the IoT delegation as a transition system, where A is a set of actors, including the devices, the cloud, and the users. And O is a set of operations, which describes the operation type and the data flow along with the operation. Then we define a set of states where the initial state is the state that there is no delegation operation being performed, and in each state the operations would driven the system transfer from one state to the next, and so we use the transition function T to describe such transitions. And in each stage, we use datasets to record the tokens. First of all, we use datasets to record the tokens that each actor issues, which indicate the actor delegate access right to others. And we also use the datasets to record the tokens that each actor receives, which indicates the actor is being delegated with the device access right. So with the datasets recording these tokens, we could determine whether a specific actor has access right to the device by checking whether there is a path from the actor to the device. Therefore, we could leverage a model checker to verify whether the predefined security properties hold in the model. That is, we just need to check that there is no path links unauthorized user to the device. So based on this module, we developed the variety, which is, as far as we know, the first verification tool for IoT cross-cloud delegation vulnerability discovery. Basically, we defined the operation templates and we define a base model that outlines the general operations and data flows in the IoT delegation. Then to describe a real-world IoT system, one could use the configuration file to extend the base model. And with the input of the configuration file, our tool would automatically generate the executable model, which is then input to the model checker Spin, and the Spin would output the counter examples. Each counter example represents a possible weakness in the IoT delegation. Then each weakness is checked manually, and thus to confirm the existence of the vulnerabilities and to investigate how to exploit such vulnerabilities for attacks. And we have made variety publicly available. And using variety, we have analyzed the 10 mainstream IoT clouds and identified 6 new delegation flows. Now I will hand it over to Yan, who will elaborate on some of these flaws we identified and will also summarize our talk. Please welcome Yan. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to start by introducing the 2 flaws of the first vulnerability category. In the first category, we find the security policies may be different in different vendors, which causes security risks when they interact with each other. The first case is about Google Home and Samsung SmartThings. In SmartThings, the device ID is used as an authentication token on trigger action management. This means when a device triggers an event in SmartThings cloud, the cloud identifies this device by the device ID, a secret token. However, in Google Home, when a user shares the devices managed by Google, it shares the device ID to the delegate user. Because for Google Home, the device ID may be used to identify devices on the SmartThings cloud, and it is not a secret. So, if a user, for example, an Airbnb host, shares a SmartThings device to a malicious user through Google Home, the malicious user can use the device ID to spoof events to trigger SmartThings to open the lock even after he checks out. Let's see the POC demo. In this scenario, the user uses the Google Home to manage his devices. The admin uses Google Home to operate on a smart switch to control her smart lock. Now he is linking his Samsung account to the Google account. Okay, now he can control the lock through his Google Home app. Then the admin delegates access to her switch to a delegatee, that is the attacker, through Google Home. The delegatee user gets the access. As an attacker, he can use the packet capture to monitor the traffic of this app. Now the delegatee can control this smart lock. Through the traffic, the attacker can find the ID of this smart switch. Then the admin revokes the delegatee's access right. So the attacker can't control this lock through his Google Home app. Okay, but the attacker can leverage the obtained device ID and develop a simple malicious script to send a fake event to the SmartThings cloud to control this lock. Okay, the conflicting security policies across IoT vendors not only happen to Google Home and SmartThings. The second case is about FTT and SmartThings. FTT uses a secret URL that should be protected for those devices triggering events. So when the URL is delegated to SmartThings, SmartThings should keep it as a secret. Meanwhile, to work with other vendors, SmartThings requests other vendors like FTT develop a smart app that runs on the SmartThings cloud to deal with the customized delegation process. Interestingly, we found that FTT smart app leaks its secret URL that SmartThings cloud need to be protected. A malicious delegate user, which is, for example, a guest on the SmartThings cloud, can get the host FTT secret URL by invoking a web API of the smart app. With this URL, an attacker can trigger the action of the affiliate in the FTT cloud after his right is revoked by the SmartThings cloud. Let's see the video demo. In this scenario, the admin operates the SmartThings switch to lock a smart lock behind FTT. This is the admin's FTT rule. The admin controls the smart lock through the SmartThings app. Then the admin delegates the access to her SmartThings switch to a delegate user, that is the attacker. He accepts the invitation. And he can control the lock too. With the right, he can get the FTT's URL from the FTT smart app. Later, the admin revokes the delegate's user's access right on the smart switch. And he loses access to the switch. However, the attacker can use the script to post an HTTP request to the obtained secret URL to control the lock. This is not expected by the owner. Okay, the second category of vulnerabilities we find result from the pitfalls in cross-vendor security policy enforcement. In the first case here, we find SmartThings mistakenly leaks the delegator's token to shared people. The smart app of Lifix allows the owner to only share selected devices to SmartThings location. So the owner who manages his home by SmartThings can only share some Lifix bulbs to the guest, not all bulbs. However, when the malicious delegate user gets a Lifix OAuth token, he can gain the IDs of Lifix devices hidden from him and control these hidden devices. Let's see the third video. In this scenario, the enemy uses SmartThings to operate Lifix bulbs. The admin delegate Lifix bulbs access right to his SmartThings account. Now he's leaking the accounts. And the admin configure the Lifix smart app so as to only expose one bulb. He has two bulbs as shown in the screen. He just delegates the right one. And he shares the bulb's access right to a delegate user. The delegate user can control the bulb through his smart things app. However, an attacker can obtain the leafless OAuth token. And using the OAuth token, the delegate, that is the attacker, can call leafless API to get all the IDs of the owner's bulbs. And with this token, the ID, the attacker can control other leafless bulbs. Okay. In addition to bugs that have to involve multiple vendors, we also find delegation pitfalls of one vendor, which is brought by its cross-vendor delegation API. Philip Hue devices use a kind of token called whitelist ID to authenticate users. When sharing a device to another user, the cloud generates a whitelist ID and an OAuth token for the user. If the OAuth token is legal, the cloud would forward the user's request to the device along with the user's whitelist ID. However, when the admin follows Philip Hue's official guide to cancel a guest access right, Philip Hue Cloud only invalidates the whitelist ID that is checked by the device. A malicious delegate user can abuse the delegation API to gain a new OAuth token and the whitelist ID, allowing him to control the Philip Hue devices through the delegate cloud after the admin revokes his access, as shown in the picture. Okay, we also measure the prevalence of the delegation problems we found. And we found that many clouds, especially when they interact with each other, have this kind of risk. This does not mean all the security risks can be exploited in the real world, because not all delegation scenarios would happen, but they are in potential risk when delegation happens. Meanwhile, the impact of our cases study not only affects the vendors we mentioned before. For example, OAuth token disclosure problem exists in at least 18 smart apps in SmartThings. Finally, we want to highlight that because of the absence of a standardized cross-cloud delegation protocol agreed by all IoT vendors, the heterogeneous and ad hoc delegation process tend to be vulnerable. When applying a custom cross-cloud authorization scheme to today's already complicated IoT delegation, developers should be careful. In the future, we recommend different vendors communicate their security assumptions and verify delegation design wherever possible. But in the short term, we think decoupling the delegatee and the delegator would let vendors have fully control of the access delegation and avoid the risks we found. Okay, that's all. Thank you.